The elevator doors stayed open longer than they should have. Elisa Lam stepped inside, pressed several buttons, looked out into the hallway, stepped back, then disappeared from the frame as if something just outside the camera mattered more than the elevator itself. For days, that video was the last known image of her alive. A 21-year-old Canadian student traveling alone through California, missing from a downtown Los Angeles hotel that already carried more grim stories than it needed. Then, almost 3 weeks later, she was found above the building, inside a rooftop water tank, after guests began complaining about the water. Authorities ruled Elisa Lam's death an accidental drowning, with bipolar disorder listed as a significant contributing factor. That is the strongest supported explanation. But one part still has weight, and it is narrow. How did a missing guest move from that elevator hallway to a rooftop tank in a building that had already been searched, without anyone clearly seeing the path? Elisa Lam arrived in Los Angeles in late January of 2013. She had been traveling through California by train and bus, documenting parts of her trip online. And she checked into the Cecil Hotel on January 28th. The Cecil stood near Skid Row in downtown Los Angeles. By then, part of the building had been rebranded as Stay on Main, but the older name was still hard to shake. It was not just a hotel in the public imagination. It was a place people already knew how to turn into a story. That matters here because Elisa's death would have been pulled into the building's reputation almost immediately. The Cecil became the backdrop, then the explanation, then the mythology. But the center of the case was never the hotel's legend. It was Elisa. She was first assigned to a shared room on the 5th floor. According to later accounts connected to the hotel, roommates complained about unusual behavior, and she was moved to a room by herself. That detail does not solve the case, but it does place her final days inside the building in a more complicated light. Something may have been going wrong before she disappeared. Elisa had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and depression. She had prescriptions for several medications, and later investigators will look closely at whether she had been taking them consistently. That fact has often been handled badly. Some people treat it like it explains everything. Others reject it because they are afraid it will make the story feel too ordinary, or too sad, or too final. But mental illness can be relevant without becoming a shortcut. It can help explain behavior without filling every blank in the timeline. On January 31st, Elisa was supposed to check out and travel north to Santa Cruz. She had been keeping in regular contact with her parents in British Columbia, but that day, they did not hear from her. Her family contacted the Los Angeles Police Department, then flew to Los Angeles to help search. Hotel staff said they saw her alone that day. Away from the hotel, one of the last known people to recall seeing her was the manager of the last bookstore. Elisa was described as lively and friendly, buying gifts for her family and thinking about whether the books would be too heavy to carry as she continued traveling. That small detail is one of the saddest in the case. It is not ominous. It is ordinary. It belongs to a young woman still imagining the next part of her trip. Police searched the hotel as far as they legally could. They searched Elisa's room. Dogs moved through parts of the building, including the roof, but did not pick up on her scent. Officers later explained that they could not search every room without probable cause. At that point, they were looking for a missing person inside a large, old, complicated building. Flyers went up, her image spread online. Then, on February 13th, almost 2 weeks after she was last seen, police released the elevator footage. The video was strange enough to become its own separate mystery. Elisa entered the elevator and appeared to press several buttons. She stepped into the corner. She leaned out into the hallway, pulled back, then stepped out again. The doors remained open. She moved her hands in a way that viewers would later replay endlessly, trying to decide whether she was hiding, signaling, confused, frightened, or interacting with someone outside of the frame. But the camera did not show another person. It showed Elisa, the elevator, and a hallway we could not fully see. That missing view became the opening people wanted. Some claimed she was being chased. Some claimed the footage had been altered. Some tried to connect the case to the Cecil's history, to films, to rumors, to patterns that may not have been patterns at all. The video was treated like a code to crack, when it was more likely something much more painful. A record of a real woman in distress, captured without enough context to understand what she was experiencing. 6 days after the footage was released, the case moved from unsettling to devastating. Guests at the hotel had started complaining about low water pressure. Some said the water looked discolored or tasted wrong. On February 19th, a maintenance worker went to the roof and checked the hotel's water tanks. There were 4 large tanks up there, used to supply water to guest rooms and other parts of the building. One hatch was open. Inside the tank, he found Elisa Lam. Her body was recovered from the tank. The opening was too small for normal removal equipment, so the tank had to be drained and cut open. Clothing similar to what Elisa wore in the elevator footage was found in the water, along with her watch and a room key. The coroner ruled her death an accidental drowning, with bipolar disorder as a significant contributing factor. Restart. There was no evidence of physical trauma, sexual assault, or suicide. Toxicology did not show recreational drugs, but the level of her prescription medication suggested she may have been under-medicated or had recently stopped taking some of it. That finding points towards the strongest ordinary explanation. Elisa may have been experiencing a mental health crisis. She may have reached the roof by the fire escape, climbed to the tank, entered through the hatch, and then been unable to get out. That is not a supernatural answer. It is not an elaborate hotel cover-up. It does not require a hidden attacker just beyond the elevator frame. And bluntly, it fits the known evidence better than the theories that turned her death into entertainment. Still, that route matters. The roof access doors and stairs were reportedly locked, and forcing them should have triggered an alarm. But the fire escape may have allowed someone to bypass those controls. Later video posted online showed that the roof could be reached that way. That weakens one of the largest assumptions in the case, that only staff could have gotten there. The water tank created another problem people keep returning to. The tanks were elevated on concrete blocks, and workers needed ladders to inspect them. The lids were heavy, and for a long time, people repeated the idea that Elisa could not have closed one from inside. But the maintenance worker who found her said the hatch was open. That one fact changes the shape of the mystery. The issue is not how she sealed herself inside. It is how she got from the hallway to the roof, from the roof to the top of the tank, and into the water, without that path becoming clear during the search. Even then, the gap does not point neatly toward foul play. Searches miss things. All buildings have blind spots. Rooftops have clutter, ladders, ledges, shadows, and access routes that make more sense to maintenance workers than to outsiders. And a person in crisis may move with a private logic no camera can explain afterward. That is what makes the Elisa Lam case so difficult to talk about responsibly. The official explanation is plausible. It is supported. It is also incomplete in the way real life is often incomplete, especially when the only surviving record is a few minutes of surveillance footage and a body found far too late. The elevator door is staying open. The careful peering into the hallway. The missed search. The rooftop access. The hatch open. The days when guests were unknowingly using water from a system that had become part of a death investigation. Those details created room for speculation. But room is not proof. The most responsible reading is always the most human one. Elisa Lam was likely not the victim of a ghost, a ritual, a serial killer, or the Cecil Hotel's dark reputation. She was a young woman far from home, possibly in the middle of a serious health episode, inside a building that gave the crisis too many places to become fatal. In the end, the elevator video did not show a murderer. It did not show a ghost. It showed a moment without enough context, and the world tried to turn that missing context into certainty. The supported answer is accidental drowning, with mental illness as a significant factor. What remains is much smaller than the legend, but it is still unsettling. The path between the elevator hallway and where Elisa Lam was last recorded alive, and the open hatch of a rooftop water tank where she was finally found. Somewhere between those two places, the camera stopped helping. The building stopped explaining itself. And the rest had to be reconstructed from locked doors, missing traces, water complaints, a fire escape, and one open hatch above Los Angeles.